Yo soy una maestra bilingüe. I grew up in Maine in a monolingual English family. I began studying Spanish in high school because a foreign language was required to get into college. For me, learning a second language was a sign of status because it meant I was going on to higher education. Learning Spanish meant breezing through basic classes where I learned to read simple sentences and conjugate some verbs, but nothing that would truly enable me to use the language out in the world. I continued studying Spanish in college, and when the chance came along to spend my junior year abroad, I naturally chose to spend it in Spanish-speaking countries. So, 6 years after I began studying Spanish, I finally learned to speak fluently and understand the language in La Habana, Cuba, and Mérida, Yucatan. While friends and I sometimes laugh over a mistake I make in my second language, I have never been ridiculed or discriminated against because I have an American accent in Spanish. Very different from my own experience are those of many children in the U.S. for whom Spanish is their first language. Rather than their bilingualism being a sign of status, it is sometimes a stigma. Rather than being encouraged and supported to maintain and improve their first language while learning a second language, they are encouraged to neglect their first language and are often given little support to achieve competency in their second. While I was considered well-educated to be learning Spanish, the structure of many schools today discourages children from being biliterate and essentially forces them to speak only English. I have been treated with respect and shown a great deal of patience by my Spanish-speaking teachers and peers during the 14 years I have been learning Spanish. In contrast, many Americans are angry when new immigrants to our country don't speak perfect English after only a short time. What does all of this mean for the future of today's children, my students? Biliteracy has opened career doors for me. Without literacy in both languages being encouraged for them, today's youth will not have the same opportunities. One of my goals in becoming a teacher is to create opportunities for my students. When I arrived at EDS a year ago, I knew I wanted to use my Spanish to help do that, but I didn't know very much about bilingual education. I quickly learned English only, ESL, early exit, transitional, dual immersion. The different bilingual options and labels seemed endless. My work experiences in schools added additional information. For every type of bilingual program, there were many different ways to implement it. The field of bilingual education appeared more and more murky the more I learned. There are so many different ways of doing bilingual education, and so many different schools of thought as to which way is best. My philosophy and beliefs about bilingual education were shaped as much by what I learned in my courses as by my personal experiences. For me, it came down to whether I believe the next generation should be biliterate or monolingual English. My own experiences told me that exposure, academic language, and maintenance over time are crucial to becoming biliterate. I would apply that knowledge to my teaching practice. In the classroom, teaching was intimidating enough, and teaching in my second language felt even more difficult. What if there were vocabulary in the reading that I wasn't familiar with? That brought up a concern for me. Do I have any right to be teaching students in a bilingual Spanish-English classroom when I myself am still a student of Spanish? At some point last fall, I made a decision. I was going to embrace the fact that not only am I teaching in Spanish, but I am also learning Spanish. I decided it was all right that I hadn't grown up in a bilingual family and that my experiences learning a second language as an adult are very valuable. I would simply teach my students as much as I could, as well as learn a lot from them. One of the great things about kids is that they rarely feel the need to be polite and will happily give you honest feedback regardless of whether it might embarrass you. My students became a sort of verbal spell check for me. I knew when I mispronounced a word because one of them would correct me, always with a smile or giggle. I decided that teaching in my second language was a wonderful way to model learning for my students. If I were reading out loud a book I hadn't read previously and had trouble with a word, I would tell them I was having trouble with it. Then I would go back and read the sentence again until I got it right. Once I got over the minor embarrassment of this, I was relieved to find that my students rarely needed to correct me. When they did, I loved the dynamic it brought to the classroom, that we were all students together. This humility served me well this past year as a student teacher. I did not try to know everything. Instead, I modeled learning alongside my students. The lessons I have learned teaching in my second language have implications for all educators. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what grade we teach, in what language, or at what school. What matters is that we are teachers. For many of us, our love of teaching has roots in our love of learning. What we bring to the classroom isn't a perfect English or Spanish fluency, but an excitement about knowledge. We must remember as teachers not to feel embarrassed when a student asks us a question we don't have the answer to, but instead to feel proud that our students are pushing forward to new learning. A good teacher is measured not only by how much he or she knows, but more importantly, by how engaged the students are and how much they are questioning, exploring, and understanding. We must model for them the belief that the key to education lies not in the knowing, but in the seeking of knowledge. Soy una maestra bilingüe y estaré aprendiendo para siempre.